Okay, so the first example of an implicit relationship type that we're going to see is called delayed instantiation. And this allows you to make, instead of direct dependencies, we're going to be making lazy dependencies. So a lazy dependency is relevant for an infrequently used or an expensive to construct object. So in case you don't want the object to be injected straight away, but you want to use it whenever it is actually required, what you can do is you can inject and store not a type T that you depend on, but a lazy of T. So instead of injecting an engine, for example, or let's try a different example. Let's suppose you need an airbag. Now let's suppose that you don't want to construct the airbag until it's actually needed. So you would inject a lazy airbag and then you would try to get its value. So essentially what would happen in this case from the autofact perspective is that the container will auto initialize the lazy with a chunk of code which will actually resolve the appropriate type whenever the lazy is actually accessed. So then you put the lazy into some field, let's call it my field, and then you will type my field.value, and that is precisely the point in the execution of the program where autofact will both construct and return a fully initialized object of type T, whatever that happens to be. So let's see how we can program all of this. Okay, so seeing how this is our first foray into implicit relationship types, I'm going to explain the scenario that we're going to be using throughout this entire section. And the scenario is very simple. We have the ilog interface, which has a single method called write, and then we have two concrete implementations of ilog. We have a console log and we have an SMS log. Now these are disposable, so they have some sort of dispose code which will also tell us when the component is actually thrown out. But in addition, the SMS log actually takes a parameter, so it requires a parameter to be able to be constructible in actual fact. So what we're going to do is we're going to inject some of these logs into a reporting component, which I'll imaginatively call reporting. So here's the reporting component. Now the first thing that we're going to take a look at in terms of implicit relationship types is of course delayed instantiation. So this is done using the lazy type. So we say lazy console log, like so. Now I'll make a constructor here, but in addition to just having the auto-generated constructor, I also let my own message so that we can see what's going on. So I'm just going to say that reporting component created like so, and then of course we'll have some sort of method which actually uses this component. So I'm going to have report as a method here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to try using the log. Now remember, it's a lazy of something, so in order to access the actual object you say log.value dot and then perform the operations on that object. So here I'll say log.value dot write, and here I'm just going to say log started. There we go. Okay, so let's build up the typical scaffolding that we need to demonstrate this. So I'll say var builder equals new container builder, and then I need to register the types. Obviously nothing unusual here, so register type console log. I'll also register type the reporting component, and then of course using the container that's being built up, so using var c equals builder.build, we're going to try resolving the reporting component and then calling this report method that we made, this one. So I'll say c.resolve reporting and then report. There we go. Okay, so one thing to point out is that our console log, being an ilog, is disposable, so it has a chunk of constructor code and dispose code that we're going to see being written out. In addition, we're going to see this line, and we're going to see the actual constructor of reporting itself. So let's execute this and see the order in which things are written. So as you can see, the reporting component is created. And then when we call report and we access the value, that's when we get the console log being created, the log gets started, that's this output message, and then the log gets disposed, we say console logger no longer required. So the implementation of delayed instantiation is actually very simple. All you have to do is you stick a lazy in there, and as a result, instead of creating the console log and injecting it at this point, you inject a function which creates it at a later point, and that's the whole point of the lazy of t. If you're not familiar with the lazy of t type, I recommend you check out the documentation on it. It's really very easy because what you do, let me just show you. So you say something like lazy dot, I think it has some sort of factory. No? Well, you can do it like this. New lazy of console log, and then you put in the construction code. So for example, you can say new console log. And it is precisely this kind of code that you're seeing here that gets injected into the component instead of the actual component, except of course that instead of just calling the new keyword, what would be happening here is something to the tune of I container context dot resolve console log and so on and so forth. But the idea is roughly the same. So this is very convenient of delaying the construction of certain components until you actually need them.